Welcome to the Author Your Life podcast, where you can write a new script for your life and become the hero of your story. I'm your host, David McRae. You are the author of your life. Let's get started.
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of Author Your Life. Today on the show, we're celebrating Father's Day. And on this episode, I wanted to talk about my dad and the lessons that I learned from my dad and from my upbringing and the time that I spent with my dad. For those of you who've been following for any time at all, really, you'll know that my dad is no longer with me. At age 22, I lost dad to cancer. And you'll know that this is the whole reason why I'm doing what I'm doing, where Author Your Life came from, was this experience of losing dad. But today I don't want to talk about the death of dad. Today I want to talk about the life of dad, and specifically what I learned during the time that I spent with my dad. Because yes, it was only 22 years and a lot of people get more than that, but a lot of people get less than that. And a lot of people don't get the quality of time that I spent with my dad. And so it's something that I'll forever be grateful for, is to have 22 great years with my dad. And I learned so much from the time that I spent with him. He was an interesting man with an interesting set of life experiences. To give you just a blurb of the time that he spent on Earth. Dad was born a couple weeks before the outbreak of World War II. He was raised in Aberdeen during the war. And some of his first memories are actually of the German bombings of Aberdeen and having to go into the night raid shelters. And Dad had a lot of interesting stories from that time. He can't remember too much, but a lot of his early upbringing and conditioning came from the time of war and also the time that happened after the war, the rationing and the rebuilding that occurred in the country. And actually, it wasn't long before Dad ended up joining the army himself. When he was 18, he left home and he joined the British Army. And for 12 years, he served in the army. He served for 4 years in Singapore and he served for 8 years in Germany. And during his time in the army, Dad became, at the time, the youngest warrant officer in the history of the British Army. Now, I don't know if that record has been surpassed by now, but whilst my dad was there, he was the record holder. And also, there's a few rumours that I've heard in the family. You can never really know what's true about this, but apparently there was a time when Dad was being considered for the SAS, the Special Air Service, which is the special forces of the British Army. Just a rumour, don't know how much truth is in it, but certainly a very interesting start to my dad's life. When he left the army, he was the top-selling insurance salesman in his company. He discovered that he had an ability to do spiritual healing. Now, Dad never particularly put a name to this, but it's probably a similar branch of Reiki. My dad did some of this healing with me, and from what I now know about Reiki, it was probably Reiki or some kind of form of Reiki that Dad discovered he was able to do. He also trained as a hypnotherapist, and in the later years of his life, he started to use this spiritual healing to help people. Now, Dad had me, his son, at age 53. Very old, not very old, but pretty old for a dad. And Dad said something not long before he died, actually. He said, "David, I was an old man before you even knew me." And that had its strengths and its weaknesses. Obviously, having me as an older man meant that I was destined to not have as much time with Dad, and that's exactly what transpired. But it also meant that I had 53 years of life experiences and lessons that Dad was able to give me from the moment that I was entering into the world and as he was raising me as a child. And that's what I really want to talk about today, is the benefits of that life experience and that accumulated wisdom that was fed into me throughout my childhood and throughout my upbringing. And specifically, if I could sum up everything that my dad said to me, and Dad said a lot, and he had a lot of opinions and advice and things that he tried to teach me. But if I could summarize them into 5 broad, big lessons, these are the lessons that I'd like to share with you today. So the very first lesson, and this is something that Dad was always harping on about, was spending time in nature. Now, I was very lucky to be raised in a beautiful part of the world. I was raised in the northeast of Scotland, just outside Aberdeen, the 3rd largest city in the country. I was raised in a village in the countryside. Now, in half an hour in one direction, you had the sea and you had the coast, the beaches, the sand dunes. And in about half an hour in the other direction, you had the highlands and the mountains. So I was raised in this beautiful part of the world with a rich and varied scenery and wildlife and landscape. And Dad was always taking me out into this as a child. We would walk down the river and we would walk through woods and we would walk up hills. Dad was always showing me the beauty of nature and the peace and the harmony that you find within nature. And this is one of his personal practices, was he was always going out even just by himself, and he would sit by the river and he would walk in the trees, and he had a little stone circle that he used to like to go up, one of the old-fashioned Celtic druid stone circles, and he liked to just sit there on the hill and really take in the landscape and what was going on around, and it was a very meditative practice for him. And it was something that he found very refreshing, and there was a real connection that he felt during this time. Now, what Dad was trying to install was anecdotal and subjective at the time, but it's interesting to see the scientific studies that are coming out that are showing how our physiology changes when we're in nature, the different chemical releases that we have. There's one particular study that comes to mind where they got 2 groups of people and they took them to an exam in a university building. One group was asked to walk through the city to get to the exam, and the other group was asked to walk through the woods and the trees to get to the exam. Now, both groups were matched for intelligence, but on the test, the group who'd walked through the trees and the woods and nature outperformed the group who had walked through the city. So there's all these interesting scientific studies that are coming out showing how nature has this very measurable and objective effect on us, as well as this subjective feeling. But the subjective feeling was more about what Dad talked about. It was being able to go out into nature and to find peace, to find silence, to find time for ourselves, and to ultimately recognize the world around us and the beauty that's in the world, this incredible earth that we've been gifted, and to really enjoy and appreciate that. So that's the first lesson I take from my dad, is to find time to spend in nature, to recharge, to find your silence, to find your own personal harmony. Second lesson that I would say that Dad taught me was to read often. My dad always had his nose in a book. Now, sometimes this was a novel, sometimes it was a thriller, sometimes it was a detective story, but certainly towards the end of his life, for sure, was he started to get interested in non-fiction, and he would read books on psychology and metaphysics and spirituality, and he was always trying to get me to read these books, and I would kind of amuse him here and there by reading a book, but I never really sort of grasped the importance of the lessons that he was trying to show me, or the wisdom that the books were trying to convey. I wasn't at the age and maturity to really get the importance of some of the messages within these books. And certainly as a teenager, I found myself reading less and less. I used to read a lot as a child, but as I turned into an adolescence, I started to play video games and smartphones came out. We had social media, and that's where my time went. My time wasn't spent on reading books, it was all these electronic technological distractions. And so I lost my way with reading for a long time, and I lost touch with reading. And it was only when I turned into an adult and I started to re-engage with my dream and my passion of becoming an author that I started to re-engage with books. And ultimately now, as my work as an author, a speaker, a podcast host. I'm now reading non-fiction so much. That's basically all that I read at the moment in my life. Is I'm reading books on psychology, I'm reading books on relationships, I'm reading books on spirituality, on business, on finance, on lots of different things to really understand and ingrain the wisdom of others. Because the wonderful thing about a book is that what an author has done with a book is they've compiled the very best ideas from their life, from their work, from their research, and they've taken all the best bits of that and they've put it into a small, digestible object, entity, for us to then take on. And what I've begun to realize more and more is that there is a powerful wisdom that we can gain through just reading, nothing else. You don't have to do the fancy courses and the fancy seminars, except mine, of course. Please come to my seminars. But really, we can learn everything that we need to learn about life from books. That's a very powerful thing to have in our lives, and it's something that I think many people in the world right now aren't embracing. We have a world that's moving further and further away from reading and from reading books. And that was a lesson that Dad really tried to impart on me, was make sure you read often, because it really starts to influence and affect your character and your intellect and your perspective on the world without even realizing it at times. So that was another lesson that Dad was always trying to teach me, was to read books, to train my brain and to keep on learning. Lesson number 3 was to maintain discipline. Now this definitely came from Dad's time in the army, where all the little micro tasks are made so important and everything is done to a certain standard in the army. And Dad continued these high expectations throughout his life. His army training never really left him in that respect. So he always wanted the house clean, to have the bed made, to do the dishes, to keep things neat and tidy, not to leave papers and books and things and laptops all over the place, to have a place for everything and everything in its place. Now again, sometimes as a teenager, I'd find this a bit of a wind-up of Dad telling me to clean things and to tidy things and to make things neat, and I think what does it really matter? It's not messy, it's not filthy, it's not unhygienic. And again, I didn't appreciate the deeper lesson behind what Dad was trying to teach me. Because what I've come to learn now, later in my life, is how you do anything is how you do everything. So the way that you do these small micro tasks, the way that you start your day, the way that you organize the space around you, all of this seems inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. And in many ways it actually is, but in other ways it's really not. How you do all these small things is like a stepping stone and a building block to what you're going to do with the rest of your day, what you're going to do with the rest of your life. So if you start the morning and you are hitting the snooze alarm, you don't make your bed, the kitchen's a mess and you have to move aside bits of dirty dishes to find what you want for breakfast, you've got to clean pots and bowls and things to make your breakfast. And all of this is just not setting you up for the day in the best possible way. So what Dad was trying to install in me was this importance of discipline, to have routines and habits and to have high standards for how you conduct yourself as a person and how you create the environment that you live in. And now I've really realized the importance of that, of having a strict morning routine, of having a dedicated workspace, of having a place for everything, for maintaining standards of neatness, cleanliness, tidiness. And I'm not perfect with these things. I do leave things lying about, but they'll quickly become a stage where I look around and I think, no, this is getting a bit of a mess now. And this mess on the outside is not helping me to be able to keep clean inside, to keep my mind jumbled, to keep my mind nice and tidy. So I really learned the importance of maintaining discipline in your life. And it's not just in terms of neatness and tidiness and keeping your home tidy. But it's also things like maintaining a regular exercise routine. It's things about how you eat your food and what types of food that you eat, how you conduct your work, how you dedicate yourself to tasks that are important. All these things build up from these basic levels, doing very simple tasks and having very high standards for these simple tasks, then transfers into everything else that you're doing. So that's lesson number 3, to maintain discipline. So moving on to lesson number 4. Lesson number 4 is to be sociable. Now, if you were to describe my dad in a certain number of words, many of the words that you'd be describing would be related to how he interacted as a person. He was extroverted, he was outgoing, he was friendly, he was jokey, he was laughy. He was a very sociable person. And to try and sum up just how sociable this was, my dad was one of those people who said hi to everyone they'd meet on the street. You'd be walking past someone and he would say, hey, how are you doing? Or in Aberdeen lingo, in Scottish lingo, he'd be like, fit like, how's it going? That was it, fit like. He's always saying fit like to people. Fit like means, how are you doing? How's it going? So he was always saying hello to people he'd walk past. And another thing that my dad did, which I still think to this day is kind of odd, and I certainly wouldn't do it, was Dad wouldn't mind just going to the pub by himself. And I don't mean like his local pub. He would just go into our pub by himself. Doesn't matter if he had been there before, or if he hadn't been there for a long time, or he hadn't gone many times. Dad was quite happy just to go into a pub by himself, to get his pint of beer, and he would either sit there by himself, he'd maybe watch a little bit of football or a little bit of sport, whatever might be on, but he was quite happy just to find someone in the pub and strike a conversation up with them. and many times I witnessed this, going along with Dad to pubs and to restaurants, was that Dad just, he enjoyed speaking to people, and it didn't matter if they were strangers, it didn't matter if he knew them, he would just have this real sociability and this wonderful ability to approach people and just strike up conversation with them. And Dad didn't just show this with strangers and with random folks, but another place that I really noticed this was with my friends. So if I think to my experiences of going around to my friends, and obviously when you're younger, your friends don't live in their own place, they live with their parents. So I'd go and visit my friends, and you'd meet their parents, and the first few times that you meet someone's parents, you don't really know them, so you say hi and maybe a little bit about yourself. And it would take a long time to develop a relationship with someone else's parents. Eventually you would get to that point, once they were kind of an ingrained friend and a close friend. Then you'd have a friendly interaction and you'd have a friendly rapport with your friend's parents. But what I noticed with my dad was that he struck it off with people straight away. As soon as I brought a new friend in, they would be on first name terms. He'd be asking them not just about themselves, but really showing an interest in their lives and asking many more questions than I'd ever found myself being asked as someone going to visit my friends and going to speak to other parents. And in particular, my dad developed close relationships with a lot of my close friends. So much so that visiting my dad became an end in itself for my friends. So they weren't just coming around mine to see me, they were coming around to mine to see me and my dad. They wanted to catch up with my dad. They wanted to speak with my dad again. They wanted to hear some of his jokes and his commentary on the world, which was always quite amusing. My friends had a relationship with my dad, and my dad had a relationship with them. And I think for some of the folks and friends that I brought around, in many ways, actually, my dad showed a lot more interest in them than their own parents did, which I think is a sad reflection on society and on some of the lives of these individuals and the people that I brought around. But it also really remarks positively on my dad that he was able to develop these relationships, and he showed a really keen interest in these relationships. And I think that's summed up in no greater way than for my dad's funeral. A number of my friends came along to the funeral, And they didn't come along for me. They didn't come along to support me and to kind of be on my shoulder and to help me out. They came because they wanted to pay their respects to my dad. They came because they had their own relationship that they were grieving and mourning. Obviously, to a lesser degree than myself, but they lost that relationship as well. They lost the relationship that they had with my dad, and I think that is the perfect summary of my dad's sociability, my dad's ability to develop relationships, was that he developed relationships with my friends far beyond what would be expected of a parent. And that's a lesson that I've learned from my dad, is to always have that sociability, because you never know who you're going to speak to who could turn into an amazing relationship. You never know what fleeting encounter, what acquaintance will suddenly develop into something so much more. So one of the lessons that I've taken on is to never assume what a relationship is going to be. Never assume that someone is just going to be that fleeting encounter, that they're just going to be an acquaintance, that they're not someone who is really someone I've got something in common with. I always try to give people a chance. I always try to be friendly and positive, interested in people. And I think through having that attitude, you actually end up creating some of these relationships out of nothing. You turn the fleeting encounter, you turn the acquaintance into something more through having that attitude, through having that extroversion, through having that outgoing nature, just to speak to people. That was something that I picked up very strongly from my dad. Now the fifth and final lesson that I'm going to share with you today, and this is something that is a couple of different ideas summarized under one umbrella. But the umbrella idea, the fifth lesson, is to make your own mistakes. One of the phrases that Dad used to say to me quite often is, "Son, it's our job as parents to prepare you for life." And what he meant by this is that you have this window of time, generally speaking 18 years, from birth to a child leaving the home. And in those 18 years, you've got to develop that person from an infant into an adult. You've got to teach them certain practices, certain principles, certain perspectives that are going to allow them to walk out the front door one day and survive and to look after themselves, to be self-sufficient, to chase their own dreams. And that's what Dad was saying. He said, I've got this limited amount of time to try and teach you the things that you need to go out into the big wide world. But when you get to that point of leaving home, I can't help you anymore. Not that I don't choose to help you, not that I'm not going to be supportive, not that I'm going to not give you advice and to help you out when times are difficult. But ultimately, once you've left home, you are your own responsibility. You've got to find your own way. You've got to make your own mistakes. And he said that's the way that you'll learn. Because I think he preempted some of the attitudes that I had, some of these lessons that I've been talking about. Yeah, Dad, whatever, I should read these books and I should, make my bed in the morning. He knew that as a child and as a teenager, you maybe don't fully appreciate how important these things are. But once you've left the home, you start to realize why these lessons are important. And you do this through making your own mistakes. That is the learning process. So this is something that Dad was very keen on. He said, I can't hold your hand because that's not going to help you through life. You've got to find your own way. And that's something that I've really taken on board after he's gone. Because you know what Dad was saying was true. He can't hold my hand. He can't be a shoulder to cry on forever. He can't be the person that I come running to whenever I have a problem. Because he's not here anymore. Now, Dad didn't mean the lesson in that way necessarily, but that really hammers home the importance of that lesson. Is our parents aren't going to be there forever. We have to learn to make our own way in life. We have to learn to be self-sufficient. We have to learn if there's something that we want to do and there's something that we want to change, we have to find our own solution. Yes, we can get help, we can get support, we can get advice, but ultimately the onus is on us to do something about that. And sometimes the way that we find that solution is to make a bigger problem, is to make more of a mess, is to fail, to look stupid, to lose our way. And that's what Dad recognized, was the importance of self-learning, the importance of self-sufficiency. And this is a lesson that's been hammered home to me and ingrained in me through the death of Dad. It's made me realize that Dad did have a limited time to work on this project of his son, this project of David. And eventually there comes a point where he had to let go and say, I've done what I can, let's hope that I've done enough. And I think there's a couple lessons in this. There's a lesson to us to learn in this way, to have the courage to go out into the world and make mistakes and be foolish and be stupid. But I think this is also important for us to remember when the time comes when we have someone to mentor, to support, to look after. Now, this doesn't have to be a child of our own. It can be someone in our family. It can be a friend. It can be a colleague at work. It can be someone that we employ. It could be a client that we have. I think sometimes we've got to recognize that we can't hold the hand of the people we support and mentor. We have to allow them to have their own self-sufficiency. We have to allow them to find their own way. We have to allow them to make their own mistakes. And that was the fifth lesson that I learned from my dad. So I hope you found those lessons useful. I'm trying to summarize 22 years of preaching and rambling and teaching of my dad into a reasonably short episode. But I think those 5 lessons have really stuck with me. And I hope that some of what I've shared has been useful and applicable to you. I'd be interested to know what you feel that you've learned from your dad. And this doesn't have to be something that your dad has taught you through what they've done and what they've said, but I think sometimes we learn just as much from a bad example as a good example. So if you don't have a good relationship with your dad, or you didn't have a very long relationship with your dad, or your dad wasn't on the scene, well, you can still learn things from that. You can still learn from what you consider to be a bad example as well as a good example. I've given you 5 lessons that I learned from Dad being a good example, but you know what? I also learned from my dad's mistakes. I also learned from my dad's limitations. My dad was by no means a perfect man, and he taught me just as much by what he didn't do or what he failed to do as what he actually did and what he actually taught me. So that might be something to consider for yourself as well, here on Father's Day. Even if you have a dad who isn't in your life, they've still influenced you. Even if that is just through learning perhaps how not to be a dad or how not to conduct yourself in relationships. Those are still important lessons. So never lose perspective on that truth. Never lose perspective on the importance of your dad, even if you don't feel your dad was necessarily a positive relationship. You still have those lessons and you still have that perspective that you otherwise wouldn't have had. So I'll leave you on that thought. I look forward to sharing more with you in the next video, and I hope you enjoyed what we covered here today. Until next time, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen and you can write whatever script you want for yourself. I'll speak to you soon. David. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it hugely if you could head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the podcast. With your review, please be as honest and detailed as you can be. Because with honest and detailed feedback, that helps me to adapt and grow this podcast to most serve you, the listener. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you aren't going to miss any of the future episodes that we've got lined up for you. Until next time, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen, and you can write whatever script you want for yourself.
So go out today and write yourself a beautiful story.